Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab. All on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
Welcome to this morning's virtual public event supporting small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, in Sub-Saharan Africa, an opportunity for the United States. My name is Dan Rundy. I'm a Senior Vice President and I'm the Director of the Project on Prosperity and Development and the Americas Program at CSIS. I would like to take a moment to thank the U.S. African Development Foundation and CS Consulting for their generous support in making this event possible. Is part of a larger project on the role of blended finance in supporting SMEs in Sub-Saharan Africa, which has culminated in the release of 3 policy briefs that can be found on the CSIS website, including one on climate change, one on the role of China in the space as well. We also released a video covering these topics entitled Empowering Sub-Saharan Africa's SME Entrepreneurs. I hope you'll go watch that video, which I encourage you to check out on YouTube after this event. SMEs are the backbone of the African economy, but many SMEs lack access to affordable financing or credit lines, preventing them from expanding their operations and businesses. Only between a third and a fifth of SMEs in Sub-Saharan Africa have a bank loan or line of credit, a number which is further restricted by high loan interest rates due to perceived risk. In fact, an estimated 28% of firms in the region are fully credit constrained. This event will discuss how blended finance, development finance institutions, and other development actors can help SMEs gain access to financing and increase private investment in Sub-Saharan Africa. Making such investments presents a crucial opportunity for U.S. development actors and private investors to fill the void left by lack of Chinese investment into African SMEs. We are excited that Senator Inhofe provided pre-recorded opening remarks. Following his remarks, we will have a conversation with 4 distinguished panelists. Elizabeth Faleke, who is the Acting President and Chief Executive Officer at USADF, Mr. Olusegun Odinaya, the CEO of Haven Hill Synergy Limited, my friend Ambassador John Simon, who's the founding partner at Total Impact Capital and a senior advisor at CSIS, and Mr. Eugene Amusen, who is the Senior Vice President at City Social Finance. Let me start first with Senator Inhofe's opening remarks.
Well, good evening. I'm Senator Jim Inhofe, and I want to take a moment to welcome you all here today. I'm glad to know we have organizations like the Center for Strategic International Studies that work hard to address the world's challenges and keep Africa at the forefront of our international discussions. Those who know me know Africa holds a special place in my heart. Over the past 20 years, I've made 168 African country visits, and I've seen the continent's economy grow exponentially. Particularly, I've seen small and medium-sized enterprises, better known as SMEs, provide prosperity for the entire continent. SMEs are the backbone of the economy, provide 80% of the jobs in Africa, and I thank you for your support of these businesses. However, as you all know, freedom, democracy, and economic development in Africa faces challenges from Chinese and Russian incursions. I can tell you it's no coincidence that China established its first overseas military base in Djibouti, strategically located on one of the most important maritime transit routes in the world. China is also funding, building, or operating at least 46 port projects in Sub-Saharan Africa. These infrastructure projects give China ownership of Africa, prosperity, and provide China strategic access to the region. At the same time, Russia is using its armed forces, mercenaries, and arms sales to buy influence and exploit Africa's natural resources. The United States cannot lose sight of the importance of our partnership with Africa's people and businesses. It's critical that our country continues supporting SMEs and other economic drivers. We should build free trade agreements with Africa's nations and continue supporting landmark legislative measures like the African Growth and Opportunity Act. I particularly appreciate the work of the U.S. African Development Foundation. They focus on giving local entrepreneurs resources to develop and grow businesses. African businesses are our strategic partners, not charity projects. And our relationships, they got to have to reflect that. It's not charity. I thank you for your support and continuing to develop the U.S.-African relations for years to come. I'm counting on you.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm so pleased that we had Senator Inhofe deliver those remarks. Let me turn to the panel now. Let me start with Elizabeth Fileke. Elizabeth, USADF has been referred to as one of the U.S. government's best kept secrets. What is USADF's approach, and how is it different from other government agencies?
Thank you, Dan, for this opportunity. I am not so sure if we're a secret anymore. As you may know, we're an independent agency, and part of what makes us different is that we invest directly in African grassroots organizations and entrepreneurs and SMEs, including Haveno Synergy, represented by CEO Olusegun in today's panel. A bit of a background here. We were founded 40 years ago by the US Congress. We have invested close to $300 million in small African organizations and SMEs. Our efforts are centered around increasing income and job creation in underserved communities, communities who face food insecurity, energy poverty, and unemployment. We just wrapped up another record year for grants, up 21% from last year. And I believe that's what makes us different from other development agencies. Our model is unique in that we direct all of our investments to 100% African-owned enterprises with no middlemen or administrative overhead. And this direct relationship is not only beneficial to our partners, but allows us to closely monitor and support each project that we fund. Our mandate is also to develop local institutions. It's the main reason why we work through African staff and partners on the ground. Our partners provide local grassroots knowledge of a country's economy, which in turn makes our programming more targeted and effective. We value and trust these voices and solutions because they know best the needs of their communities. And this is built into our implementation model. Our experience shows that small-scale grants can provide a sizable direct return on investment. And according to research conducted by Foreign Policy Analytics, for every $10,000 that USADF grants funding, concentrated mainly in the Horn, Sahel, and Great Lakes region of Africa, an average of 25 workers are hired in the agriculture sector, 19 by youth-led enterprises, and 79 people are connected to electricity. And this is the kind of immediate impact that we're continually seeking and makes us slightly different from our sister agencies. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Ambassador Simon, you used to be Executive Vice President of OPIC, you were Ambassador to the African Union, and now you run a very successful impact investment merchant bank called Total Impact Capital. And I'm glad that you're also a senior advisor at CSIS. Can you explain what blended finance is and how it can be used to catalyze private capital?
Sure, Dan, and thank you for organizing this event, and thanks CSIS for bringing this great group of folks together. It's great to see you all. In terms of blended finance, it's a fairly simple concept and one that has become very widely used in the impact investing space. And basically is the idea of, rather than creating an investment with one tranche of funding where investors all get the same basic risk-reward proposition, the idea is to mix different types of fundings that have different risk expectations and reward expectations, including concessional finance, so that you can create a financing offer for the folks who need the funding, the investees, that meets their needs. And in some cases, this is about making financing more affordable in markets where interest rates are particularly high. In some cases, it's about reducing the risk so that more market return-seeking capital can participate in high-impact opportunities. And then many times, this concessional finance will come from official aid agencies. Sometimes it'll come from philanthropies. Sometimes it comes from certain windows that exist within development finance institutions. And if you bring all of these different streams of capital together, what you're able to do is overcome many of the barriers that SMEs face in developing markets. One major barrier, for instance, is being able to get longer-term capital as opposed to very short-term capital. And if you're able to have a tranche of funding that is willing to absorb a fair bit of risk over a long period of time, then you can provide longer term financing. One issue you often have is that investors particularly impact investors that are coming from hard currency countries have a difficult time absorbing the currency risk in developing countries. And again, if you have a tranche of funding that's willing to absorb that currency risk, that allows for the financing to work. And in many instances, you have a situation where you have investors who are very interested in high impact, are willing to take a relatively modest return, but are not willing to put their principal at risk. And therefore, something like a guarantee, again, on concessional terms, can help unlock that capital. So, the basic idea of blended finance is a recognition that we need a lot more capital flowing into things like SME finance in the developing world. That capital on purely market terms is unlikely to come at the scale that's required. And therefore, through blended finance, you can unlock that capital, and each dollar of concessional capital can leverage, in many cases, 5, 10, even more in terms of market return seeking capital, and therefore open up the door for a lot more finance.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Olusegun, thanks for being here. Can you tell us a bit about Haven Hill Synergy Limited? And what type of financing environment do you see in Nigeria, and what are the barriers to growth for you as an SME? Oh, we may have lost him. Olusegun. Olusegun?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, great. Can you tell us a bit about Haven Hill Synergy Limited? And go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you for having me and inviting me to this event. Haven Hill is a clean tech micro-utility company. We use solar energy to generate clean, safe, cost-effective, and sustainable electricity in rural and urban Nigeria. And in rural areas, what we do is to identify commercially viable, off-grid rural communities that need access to electricity. And of course, that according to statistics, about 80 million Nigerians presently still lack access to electricity. And these are people who live at the bottom of the pyramid. These are people who do not have roads, they do not have, basic, medical attention, they do not have, really good schools. So we identify these communities and then going to provide them with electricity. And within the urban area, we also help businesses, commercial enterprises, to diversify their energy mix, move away from fossil fuel, give them reliable and steady electricity that is even cheaper than, grid and even diesel generators. And over the last 18 months, we've also pivoted to providing, of course, COVID-19, brought to the front line the effect of, neglect in the healthcare sector over the years. And so we are now going into the healthcare space, providing electricity to, primary healthcare and secondary healthcare institutions. As of today, I think we've done about 30 installations, across 2 states, within the country. And we hope to, continue to expand that. And let me just lay emphasis because, sometimes when you begin to ask, what's the testimony of USADF? I think even is one of the testimony that USADF is proud of because they actually gave us wings to fly. I don't think without USADF, we'll probably be where we are today because they gave us the seed capital that then prepared our organization to go commercial. Thank you.
Great. Eugene, thanks for being here. Citi is a large multinational financial institution. How are you approaching the problem of financing SMEs in Sub-Saharan Africa?
Great. Thanks for the question, Dan. Great to be here. And thank you also for putting out the briefs that you have on SMEs in Africa. It's clearly a very important space. Maybe it's worth starting with the Citi context. In Africa, we're present in 16 countries, and in the vast majority of them, we are the only American bank. And when you look at Citi in any of these local markets, we have the features of any local bank. We have local balance sheet, we have local clients. Importantly, we have local currency that, at our disposal. But mostly, it's a corporate bank. And we don't have a retail presence like we do in a place like the United States. So when we started more than 15 years ago, initially thinking about, well, how can we support expanding access to finance? It started with microfinance for us. And we were never really going to be delivering microfinance ourselves. It was working with microfinance institutions. And we've now taken that and extended that to SMEs as well. So it's working with microfinance institutions, working with banks, and enabling them to lend and expand finance to SMEs. What's really interesting and what's happening at the moment is that there's a new generation of SMEs that are disrupting status quo, a lot of it based on digital technology. And these SMEs are run by highly educated entrepreneurs who are now using all the same tools that we would recognize in the US, Western Europe, et cetera. And what you now have are SMEs that have realistic aspirations to go public and be listed in the next 3-4 years. So we're really thinking about this in a dual approach, still working through local banks and local microfinance institutions for the mass SME market, but at the same time recognizing that there are high achieving SMEs that are going to grow and that are going to be the future corporations that are going to add value to and expand access to basic services across the continent.
Great. I'm a Citibank alum. I worked in Argentina in another life, so I understand exactly what you're talking about. That's great, Eugene. Thank you so much. Elizabeth, let me come back to you. How is USADF looking at scaling up their partners and giving their partners in Africa access to capital or resources that will help them scale up a successful idea?
It's a good question. Our experience has demonstrated that grantees, whether it's an agricultural cooperative or SME entrepreneurs who can become the backbone of African economies, are likely to face inequity in financing. And you've mentioned it before, and also Ambassador Simon. And in most cases, what we're finding is that, especially at the lower tier level, they lack training and mentorship opportunities, especially in the business environment. And the challenges around financing are both accessibility and affordability, as mentioned before by all of you. And Dan, you've mentioned between a third and a fifth of SMEs in Sub-Saharan Africa have a bank loan or line of credit, which is very low. And so, banks typically charge high interest loans, which deter SMEs from applying for financing. And so USADF is focused on these challenges. On the one hand, we know that we need to identify ways to match the grant capital that we provide with the capacity building support needed by entrepreneurs, especially those operating in early stage enterprises. We also want to ensure that SMEs succeed past USADF's initial investment. So we introduced a new approach, which is what we call the USADF graduation model, where we're looking for ways to prepare some of our grantees to become eligible for innovative debt-like products like zero interest rate loans or recoverable grants. And so this approach is intended to address both the issue of affordability and accessibility in financing. We know that grant funding alone is not enough, so we're facilitating the development of standard tools and corresponding training materials and methodologies to ensure SMEs receive capacity building regardless of the economic sector they're in or locations they're in. And what we hope to achieve is not only improve the business capacity and revenue of our grantees, but also improve the chances of repayment to the lending entity. And this approach is also helping us create, guide, and sustain our partnerships with the private sector. And one good example of this strategy is actually our partnership with Citibank in the DRC. USADF last year launched a successful youth incubator program, which combines both business training with small grant funding. And through the program, we've selected 20 youth who are receiving seed capital and support to produce viable and sustainable business plans, which is, then leads to improving their business operations and put them on a path to, grow their businesses. And Olusegun is in our energy portfolio. USADF initial investment of about $10 million in select and renewable energy SMEs, including Haven Hill Synergy, has led to SMEs securing nearly $13 million in follow-on financing from various sources. And of course, our newest partners with the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, which we've created what we call the Africa Small Business Catalyst Project to provide financing to the missing middle, those entrepreneurs and SMEs that do not have the track record necessary to access commercial capital and are typically too small for investment from development finance institutions. So this program is intended to address that. So this program will provide between $50,000 to $500,000 from the DFC in terms of loan, accompanied by grants between $10,000 and $100,000 from USADF to African entrepreneurs in low and middle income countries. So we're hoping to start this innovative project in 2022.
Great. Okay, Ambassador Simon, what are the barriers that SMEs face in markets like Sub-Saharan Africa?
Yeah, well, some of the barriers that SMEs face are the barriers that SMEs face everywhere. I have a friend whose father was a banker, I think, well, maybe not at Citi, but when he asked his father what he did, he said, "Oh, I lend money to people who don't need it." So, there's always a challenge for a young enterprise, a small enterprise, to get access to financing. In less developed markets, I think that challenge is exacerbated. So what you see is a lot of the banks insist on 130, 140% collateral, which again is fine if you have a lot of assets. Very difficult if you're a growing business. A lot of banks don't give credit to intangible assets, things like invoices, which again, many businesses, if they want to extend credit to people further down the chain, they need to get credit themselves, and they need those invoices to be viewed as valuable assets. And then there, as I mentioned before, it's very difficult to get longer-term financing to fund capital investment. There's overdraft facilities and different types of products that can finance short-term working capital needs. But if you really want to grow in your own business, you need to make investments in capital, which is very difficult to get financing to do. So I think a lot of the solutions that people are looking for are things, for instance, like invoice financing mechanisms that allow businesses to sell their invoices, get cash immediately, finance the needs they have, and then as those invoices are paid back, they would get further funding. Another really important element is developing different types of capital providers who actually meet the needs of the SMEs, both from a finance point of view and from a capacity building point of view. So there are a number of initiatives. We're involved in one, something called Nyala Ventures, which seeks to provide financing, which seeks to support not the SMEs themselves, but the local capital providers, give them the types of financing that they could use to provide longer-term capital, more affordable capital, more flexible capital to the SME, and also at the same time builds the capacity of those local capital providers so they're able to manage these somewhat challenging portfolios. So I think there's certainly a lot of the challenges that you see are the same challenges that SMEs face elsewhere, but even more so. I think one big challenge is you don't see a lot of the solutions that exist in more developed markets. And part of what we need to do and are looking to do through things like blended finance and mobilized impact investment is to create more of those solutions in these markets.
Great, thanks, Ambassador Simon. Olusegun, thank you. What type of financing environment do you see in Nigeria, and what are the barriers to growth for you as an SME?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think over the years, especially, if I take the energy sector, for example, there's been a lot of investment in the power sector in Nigeria that has not really yielded the kind of results that we wanted to see. And so the traditional local financial institutions still, take that same lens to look at renewables, the same lens, and so when you go to the local bank in Nigeria to, access capital, you are asked as an SME to bring collateral, buildings or lands, and these are things that the typical, SMEs do not have, because if they have them, they will actually not be going to the bank, going to the bank to raise. I remember some 6 years ago, we wanted to raise about, in present day, maybe about 70,000 US dollars, and we asked to bring a collateral, which we did not have, and so we could not move the business forward at that time. But now, the landscape is beginning to change, but however, relatively slow. You are now beginning to see, private equity investment within the space. You are beginning to see infrastructure funds. However, the challenge is that most of the SMEs that operate within this space still do not have the requisite, capacity, to be able to attract this investment. And I will come back to why, impact investing is very, very important, because some 5 years ago, we got a seed funding from USADF that helped us to build, our first, mini grid, which give us a proof of concept into, how these things works and how it can be done. And then we got, partial funding to build the second and third. With that, we're able to learn, the technicality, the commercial viability. We learn all our lessons. And then this year, we then went to the market to raise commercial funding. We raised over $4 million this year. And that could only happen because there was something on the ground. There was something that we've been able to do. So just imagine we are taking 100% debt to finance our first project. It will have been a problem because we'll be learning the lessons in the hard way and trying to still pay back, the investment we've taken. So there's still a lot of opportunities because I won't say access to capital is relatively available because it takes you an average of 18 months to actually do, to start a financing round and close it. And we've been there several times, either from local institutions, local banks, and then, somewhere in the 12th month, they tell you that, oh, we can't proceed, the landscape has changed, or even from, other financing institutions. But essentially, when we look at, from the aspect of energy, the technology is ripe. There's really nothing new you will find within, the solar energy or renewable energy space, that is new any longer. What has been the missing link, the barrier, is access to finance. The knowledge, the education, the training, the skills gap are being breached, by several institutions that are coming in doing technical assistance and all those things. But there's still need for billions of dollars of investment if we're going to take Africa, out from darkness, and bring, electricity to every nook and cranny of the continent.
Thank you very much. Eugene, what do you need from government partners, official partners, if I can use that term, to make it easier for Citi to operate in these environments? How can Citi and other financial institutions work with these official institutions?
Sure, thanks for that. So official bodies, government agencies, development finance institutions, multilaterals are all very important to enabling banks like us to deploy assets and deploy capital on the ground. Elizabeth mentioned DFC. The DFC is a significant partner of ours. They're a great partner. With them, we've deployed more than $3 billion to development projects that expand access to basic services. And if you just zoom in on that a little bit, what's really interesting about DFC is that they have a range of tools at their disposal. They can do guarantees, they could do equity, they could do co-financing, they could do political risk insurance. And that's important because different situations require different tools. And so, if you bring a guarantee to a very small transaction, it's an inappropriate instrument because it may be too unwieldy or too difficult to implement. So we use a lot of those different tools with DFC and others as well. An interesting example of Ambassador Simon was talking about blended finance. is a program that we have with the DFC and the Ford Foundation called Scaling Enterprise. And it's a $100 million guarantee program that enables us to finance working capital in local currency to earlier stage companies. And what's really interesting about that from additionality perspective, one, it's working capital. That's a tool that government bodies, DFIs, multilaterals typically don't have at their disposal. And of course, local currency is the other benefit. So we've been able to bring a development finance institution, a large foundation, and a commercial bank together to do this. So it is possible. And ultimately, for the end borrower, and to Ola Shukun's example of 18 months, it needs to be simple. So with guarantees are a great instrument, and that's what we use for Scaling Enterprise, because we could create an umbrella program that then can enable us to do small cookie cutter transactions that make it more efficient on an individual transaction basis.
Excellent. Great. All right. Elizabeth, how are USADF's partners in Africa responding to challenges like COVID-19? We haven't talked about COVID-19 yet in this conversation. And also climate change, COVID-19 and climate change. How are these issues exacerbating existing challenges for them, for your partners, such as access to capital, Elizabeth?
Thank you. As everyone knows, the pandemic has had a significant impact. It's no different for us. You may know that 70% of our grantees, are actually farming communities, and so some of the challenges they faced include, for example, logistical support to move produce from the field to the market. The lack of people's ability to travel has also affected these communities' ability to interact with buyers. So in some cases, this has led to some buyers defaulting on contractual agreements. And related to this is a major problem with storage and proper packaging to ensure that produce will not spoil. And though this is a challenge that existed prior to the pandemic, it was exacerbated by COVID-19. And another challenge is availability of production inputs, feeds, fertilizers, labor, et cetera. So it's not just production, but there's a noticeable effect in the demand for products as well, particularly for export-oriented commodities such as coffee, where activities drop in developed countries affected demand and the exports of these commodities from Africa. So the duration of the disruption has impacted demand and prices as well. And that affects the financial health of our farming communities as well as our SMEs. For example, in areas where mobile money is not widely used, grantees and local partners are facing liquidity issues as local banks have curtailed their operations and limited customer access, and in turn, lack of financing is becoming a major issue. So there's a growing realization from our part that the gains that we've made through our grant making could be lost very quickly. So in response, we created a program last year and allocated funds to offer immediate financial assistance to grantees to offset the effects of the pandemic. Our initiative provided early stage entrepreneurs with immediate working capital to pay salaries and avoid bankruptcy and having to exit the market, which could ultimately destroy many of our prior investments. So our immediate step was to provide this initial relief. This program was also essential for existing entities to reconfigure their business models to adapt during the pandemic, where, for example, some of our efforts in the off-grid area, our off-grid energy grantees were supporting rural health clinics, or textile and garment grantees are supporting the production of PPEs. So our strategy was to see how we can support grantees in repurposing and reconfiguring their business model to adapt to the changing environment in their communities and the overall markets in those communities. And finally, the pandemic has crystallized the need for innovation as business ecosystems and funding paradigms are disrupted and impacted in ways that we've never seen before. So as we continue to connect with large numbers of our partners on the ground and implementing partners in Africa, we are continually assessing the longer term impact of the pandemic and in turn provide support. The need to create mechanisms to sustain businesses long term is there. beyond the initial grant funding that we're providing. And so that's why we see blended financing as one approach to providing SMEs with access to capital needed to recover from the impact of COVID-19. So we feel we're well placed to support these efforts with partners such as DFC and Citibank, et cetera. In terms of climate change, we know that Africa is the most exposed region to the adverse effects of climate change, despite contributing the least to global warming. Climate change is closely linked to poverty and overall economic growth, and we all know that. And it's one of the main reasons why the Biden administration included combating climate change in its national security strategy. And so over the past 5 years, USADF has invested over $29 million towards programs in critical sections, in agriculture, energy, and water that foster adaptation and mitigation measures and resilience to climate change. So when we talk about our climate change strategy in our core portfolio, which is in agriculture, we're not just talking in terms of strengthening agricultural production. We're also focusing on how do we create resilience to climate change with the farming communities that we work with. And so it's been the foundation's fundamental investment strategy that spans decades. So for us, it's not a new conversation. It's a conversation that we've been having for decades. And we feel that the mechanisms that we're putting forward in terms of partnering with the private sector will be one way to deal with that.
Okay, Ambassador Simon, how should USADF, USAID, and the DFC and sort of the alphabet soup of U.S. government agencies, how can they work more closely together to create blended finance, especially in the context of Sub-Saharan Africa?
I forgot to unmute my microphone. The answer, Dan, actually, is that's happening now. And I think Elizabeth and Eugene mentioned a few examples. I'll mention another one. You all recognize, Elizabeth was just talking about the challenges that COVID presented to her portfolio. Another sector that was very hard hit by COVID across the world, but particularly in Africa, was the health sector. As COVID hit, many health facilities found their revenues go through the floor as people didn't want to come to a facility where they could potentially get infected. And what that meant is not only were these businesses at threat, but the health systems themselves were at threat. So in partnership with a number of foundations, the Rockefeller Foundation, Skoll Foundation, the MCJ Amelia Foundation, a group called the Health Finance Coalition got USAID and the Development Finance Corporation to get together where the Development Finance Corporation provided a almost $20 million guarantee, where the what's called the subsidy under federal credit reform, that's basically the loss reserve, was paid for by USAID, and the upfront capital was paid for by the foundations. And this guarantee was provided to the Medical Credit Fund, which is one of these specialized local capital providers I'd mentioned before that provides capital in a way that many of the banks won't, to basically go out and lend to these at-risk health facilities. And already much of this money has been deployed, and it did a tremendous job in making sure that several of these facilities were able to weather the storm. And now, in fact, we're seeing that as mitigation measures are being lifted, and people are learning how to manage the COVID crisis. So I would say the COVID crisis is far from over in Africa. Many of these facilities' revenues are coming back, and they're able to repay these loans. So that's a situation where you had a mechanism that was a DFC mechanism, actually a mechanism that to some extent was a DFC mechanism as a result of the BUILD Act, which I know you're only too familiar with, Dan, that leveraged then USAID grant funding in a blend that then also leveraged private foundation funding and an existing vehicle. The other opportunity, I think Elizabeth mentioned this as well, is to try and take innovative models to solve these obstacles to access to finance. And one that hasn't been mentioned, but I think we should certainly put on the table, is digital finance. So right now, most loans that, for instance, the Medical Credit Fund makes are actually digital loans that they are able to make through a digital app that basically are lent against digital revenues that are coming in through systems like M-Pesa. And I think this is sort of something that is sort of a leapfrog technology relative to what we would see in this country, and allows a lot more finance to get out the door far more quickly. And of course, there are multiple digital finance products in Africa today, Shawarma, Branch, many others, that really create the opportunity for access to capital that not only didn't exist in Africa before, but didn't exist in much of the developed world.
Thank you. Olusegun, as an SME in Sub-Saharan Africa, how do you view China's role in Africa? Olusegun, I don't know if we have a screen freeze. We may have a technical issue. Let me come back to you. Let me go to Eugene. Olusegun, are you on?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so
can you hear me?
Yeah, as an SME in Sub-Saharan Africa, how do you view China's role?
That's a very interesting question. But I don't see much of Chinese investment in the SME sector in Africa, at least from my own perspective. You see a lot of equipment financing, but when you talk about the Chinese government or Chinese institution or their donor agency bringing money or funds or investment into SMEs in Africa or in Nigeria, I think it's very, very, very minimal. What I see is China is trying to compete on an area where they have strength, and that's on manufacturing, on equipment, and so you try to talk, to a manufacturer in the West who is giving you like 4 or 5 times the cost, you will get a product in China, which is of relative efficiency, relative capacity. And so I see this as an opportunity for, U.S. agencies, U.S. Financial institutions to come into the space. Both Elizabeth and, John mentioned about innovative financing. And this is very, very important because we need to look for what works for the local, markets. For example, when you look at the currency fluctuation in Nigeria, it's very difficult for an SME to come outside of Africa to take a dollar or a euro denominated debt and bring it to Africa, because the value of naira to a dollar, today, you don't know what it looks like 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, or 2 years down the line when you are paying back, and we've been on that road before. So I see a lot of opportunities for the West to come in, into this space and be innovative and provide financing at a pace where we can actually experience scale. Because it's when we experience scale that we can create jobs, we can, solve these problems that, the effect of the emissions have caused in Africa.
Got it. Okay. So, Eugene, what are the opportunities that you see in Sub-Saharan Africa, and what are the challenges you're trying to mitigate in a geography like Sub-Saharan Africa?
Sure. I think opportunities, I'll actually build off of what Ambassador Simon was talking about. The digital infrastructure is enabling models that are unfathomable otherwise. What you have is overall on the continent a limited purchasing power by consumers. So if you're trying to expand access to products and services and they can't afford that, you have to be able to find a way to finance that. And what digital is enabling is embedded finance models that are expanding access to energy, expanding access to agricultural inputs, markets, healthcare, and beyond. And it's not just digital payments, by the way. I mean, we're seeing medicine by drone delivery that's overcoming infrastructure challenges. So the business model innovation is exciting. At the same time, the other opportunity is the human capital. So all the work that Elizabeth and the USADF are doing with nurturing that talent and enabling the next generation of entrepreneurs to have the same tools at their disposal as entrepreneurs in more developed markets, that's what's really going to drive the sector on. The challenges are all to document that. I mean, execution is always a challenge from a business execution perspective. It's just a more challenging operating environment. And what tends to happen when you're doing something innovative and on the continent, you're doing it for the first time. So overcoming those first steps and building precedent and leading by example is both a challenge but also an opportunity.
We've gotten several interesting questions from the audience. Could someone address the dilemma of financing for new SMEs versus already established SMEs, particularly when opportunities are drawing diaspora capacity and business smarts back to Sub-Saharan Africa? Maybe Ambassador Simon, let me start with you on that.
Yeah, so obviously getting a credit record is critical to getting access to finance. One challenge you have is credit information is very limited in Africa. So, establishing that credit record is even more difficult. I do think when you think about a new SME, one place to look is through something like vendor financing, and to start the process by getting financing from your vendors, and then moving on to getting financing from other vehicles. I also do think that in these digital systems, you actually can get access to credit as a new entity, very small to start with, but as a new entity much more quickly than you could in the past. Because what the digital systems do is they look at your revenues that are going through your till, the payment system that is how you collect your revenue. And if your revenues are 1 million shillings a month, then what they can do is they can say, fine, we'll lend you 3 million shillings a month, but we're going to deduct, a third of your revenues each month, and that's how we'll be paid back. And they have security in knowing that they already see those revenues. So I do think that digital finance offers an avenue for new entities that have previously been closed. I do think vendor finance, by looking to your vendors to front you, provide the product and then be paid back from your revenues, is another way, which is why invoice financing is so important. And obviously, it's one other benefit of digital financing is now the data is accessible. Obviously, it needs to be protected, but ultimately there is a way to get more data out there, because one way to increase access to finance is to increase transparency around the payment behavior of those folks seeking loans.
Eugene, could I bring you into this? And maybe, I don't know if Elizabeth or Olusegun have views on this, but let me start with Eugene.
Yeah, sure. I mean, typically when you look at financing, you look at the track record. So, what has the business accomplished, and how do we know that that's how you kind of get certainty that what the business is planning to do in the future has some credibility. So when you're looking at an organization that doesn't have a track record, there's kind of a fundamental challenge there. With that said, I'm speaking from a perspective of a commercial bank, and there is a spectrum of capital, right? So if you're a startup SME, a bank is probably not the right, commercial bank is probably not the right source of capital for you. And you need to look at something earlier stage, impact, philanthropic, and definitely equity.
Elizabeth?
One thing that I can very quickly add is this is one area that we're looking at, as a foundation. We're looking at those businesses that are established. They're not startups, but at some point in their day-to-day operations, they've requested credit and been denied. And so, and this is part and parcel of a program that we're going to launch in the next few weeks with actually Stanbic Bank out of Kenya, is to look at, why are these businesses not getting the financing? What is the underlying problems that they're facing to access that credit? So we're working on a list of SMEs to see, how can we get them on a path to creditworthiness and to that financing. And so we're in the process of looking into that. We've selected a group of companies that we're going to be working with in Kenya. And it's going to be a learning process for us, because we're hoping to replicate this program. If it becomes successful and we can put some of these SMEs on the path to creditworthiness and business sustainability, to allow them to access commercial financing, that is a model that we can actually use and replicate in other countries in Africa. So we're hoping in the next 2 years or so to develop some sort of a model that fits into our approach towards SMEs in Africa.
Great. Olusegun, I'd welcome your comments. Oh, looks like maybe the screen froze. I'll come back to Olusegun, but in the meantime, how can these programs impact or benefit women entrepreneurs in agribusiness? Elizabeth, would you like to comment on this?
That is a very good question. In fact, the majority of our investments in SMEs in Africa are with women-owned businesses, as well as with youth entrepreneurs. We've made that the focus of our programming and the focus of our grant funding. In fact, we have a very strong program with the State Department that was launched a couple of years ago, where we're awarding anywhere between 30 to 40 grants to women-owned entrepreneurs every year. And so it's an area that we're very keen to continue, and where we're actually seeing some very good impact. And so that's been a major focus area for us.
Eugene?
Thanks, Dan. So in our financing of microfinance, we have lent more than $1 billion, and we reach more than 3.6 million borrowers, of whom more than 90% are women. And so there is a natural tendency when you go micro that these are women-led businesses. And so we need to continue to focus on that. And one way that we're doing that is we're, I think, the only bank that's founding member of the 2X Collaborative that's now focused on gender lens investing. The DFC really pioneered the 2X standard, and now that's being spun out into a separate organization. Agriculture is challenging, but there are innovative business models that are solving both the input and the market issues. So it's about finding those that are doing it at scale and enabling them to go to the next level.
Ambassador Simon, let me get to you, and then I'll go to Olusegun for the question about how can these programs impact or benefit women entrepreneurs in agribusiness, Olusegun. But let me first hear from Ambassador Simon.
Yeah, very quickly, I was only going to reference the 2X initiative as well, which is a major initiative. Like Eugene said, it was catalyzed by the Development Finance Corporation, but now it encompasses all the major DFIs. A number of the vehicles we work with are part of it, and it's a major driver in trying to push development finance capital, blended capital, impact investment capital into both women-managed funds and women-owned businesses, and I think it's making a big difference.
Olusegun, do you want to comment on this?
Can you please repeat the question? Thank
you.
Yeah,
sure. How can these programs impact or benefit women entrepreneurs, especially in agriculture?
Great. I think now there's even a nexus, between energy and agriculture, and I think specifically focus has to be made on maybe women-led enterprises, women in agriculture, and special emphasis, and I think USADF is doing, something like that. When you roll out, and maybe a financing program, you dedicate a percentage of that financing to women-led businesses or women in agriculture, and that encourages, and in some cases, for example, like we do in some of our projects, we have a discounted tariff for women-owned businesses, because we know that when you provide, access to finance, beyond, all those things to a women-led business, it impacts our family, our children, and everybody. So I think emphasis has to be made. We need to be deliberate, because, for example, even if you look in the energy sector, you find more men, than women. So that we need to be deliberate in ensuring that we take out all the barriers, that would stop, women from coming. And it's the same thing for finance. In some cases, lower, the requirement in such a way they can fit in, and then we'll be able to bring out, more women into the wider pool of funds.
Okay. All right. So we're coming close to the end. We've only got a few minutes. I want to give you each kind of 30 to 60 seconds for sort of a parting thought about blended finance for SMEs in Africa. Let me start with you, Ambassador Simon, and then I'll go to Eugene Olusegun, and I'll give Elizabeth the last word. Ambassador Simon.
Once again, I forgot to unmute my microphone. Just two thoughts, Dad. One, to your question about to Olusegun earlier about the competition with China, if you will. SME finance is one area where I think the United States and our partners are much more well positioned, much better positioned to provide support than the Chinese. It's not an area where you can do a lot of top-down direction of capital. It's an area where you need to work in partnership with organizations on the ground. You need to be able to be innovative. You need to be able to be customer focused and really meet the borrowers where they are. And I think that's something that's very much at odds with the approach that China's espousing through the Belt and Road Initiative. So I do think that we think about ways that we can counter Belt and Road SME finance using impact investment and blended finance, which leverages not just our own public dollars, but also a tremendous amount of private dollars, is one way to do it. And the other thing I would want to emphasize is the ferment that's happening on the ground is quite astounding in terms of the innovation around things like digital, in terms of the entry of new players that are taking different approaches, in terms of the investors that are looking for vehicles that they can put their money into and really make a difference. And really right now, it's incumbent upon us to take advantage of this moment in time when really a lot of the stars are aligned to make aligning to make a really big difference through many of the tools that we talked about in terms of access to credit for African business. And so I view this as a golden opportunity, and one that I hope we don't miss out on.
Great. Eugene?
Sure, and I also have two thoughts. One is, don't be afraid of unusual partnerships. I think in the development finance space, there are proven models, but I think to really go deeper and to be catalytic, we need to try different things, and go into structures that previously perhaps we wouldn't have thought to go into. And another thought is, we've talked a lot about DFC, and of course they are a great partner. But actually, Dan, I was listening to your webinar on U.S. leadership in multilateral development institutions, which is well worth watching as well, and reading the paper. And it got me thinking that we work with other multilateral institutions. We work with the Asian Development Bank and have risk-sharing partnerships with them. We should have something similar for the African context as well.
I love it. Olusegun?
Yeah, my final thought is, on blended finance. I've said it, and it's been said that there needs to be innovation, in funding SMEs, in Africa, and I think without that innovation, we'll come back, to this conversation, 3 years down the line, because that's the only way we can actually take, Africa and its people out of poverty, in all spheres of it. Thank you.
Okay, Elizabeth, I'll give you the last word.
Thank you. I'm echoing everything else that my colleagues have said here. We are realizing that our funding must be catalytic. It must be impactful. And for us to be able to do that, we must partner with the private sector, with other entities to ensure that we're addressing one of the biggest challenges that SMEs face in Africa, which is the issue of access to financing and credit. So we're hoping to continue on this path. We're hoping to expand our work, and we're hoping to continue partnering and not be afraid to partner with interesting institutions, as you've mentioned, Eugene. And so I hope blended finance is part and parcel of our framework and our model moving forward.
That's excellent. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. This ends our conversation. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.